Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Laura had spent the night pacing the living room of her apartment, fingers trembling every time her phone buzzed with a new alert. For weeks she had been chasing the shadow of someone calling themselves C, a person who seemed to know details about her life she had never shared publicly. She had assumed it was Esme, or someone working for Heather, or maybe even Victor's unseen remnants reaching from beyond the grave. But nothing fit. Nothing made sense. And now the anonymous text that had come in an hour earlier. Meet me at the old mine road. Bring no one. It's time you knew. Was echoing in her mind like a warning bell she couldn't silence. The wind at the abandoned site was vicious, scraping against the rocks as Laura stepped out of her car. She wrapped her coat tightly around her body and took small steps toward the faint figure standing near the broken fence. I'm here, she said, trying to sound stronger than she felt. Her voice carried into the emptiness. If you wanted to talk, let's talk. No more games. The figure didn't respond at first. It remained turned away, head lowered, shoulders rigid. Then the person shifted, and Laura felt a sudden chill race through her. The stance, the familiarity. Something about the shape of the shoulders and the slow exhale reminded her of someone she had buried long ago. This isn't possible, she whispered before she even knew why she had said it. The figure finally turned, and Laura's breath collapsed in her lungs. No, she gasped, taking a step back. No, you can't be. Hello, Laura, the figure said quietly, lifting their chin, revealing the unmistakable eyes she had hoped never to see again. It's been a long time. Laura felt herself sway. This is a trick. You're dead. I saw you. I watched you die. But you also know better than anyone that in our world, death is rarely the end. The voice was calm, almost gentle. I didn't want it this way, but it had to be done. Her knees nearly buckled as she stared at him. See, she breathed. You're C. You've been tormenting my family, threatening the people I love. Why would you do this after everything we lived through? The man stepped forward, his expression unreadable. I wasn't tormenting them. I was watching them, protecting them, and protecting you. You call this protection? Laura snapped, her voice rising sharply. Cryptic messages, veiled threats, manipulating events around my family. What in God's name do you think that is? He held her gaze unmoving. Survival. Laura shook her head, unable to accept what she was seeing. Cameron Lewis, you died in that fire. I buried you. I cried for you. I mourned you. Her voice cracked, pain swelling in her throat. How could you let me believe you were gone? Cameron, once a young man she had mentored and trusted, someone who fell into darkness years ago, blinked slowly. Because I had a choice. Stay dead or watch my enemies destroy everything I ever loved. I chose what was necessary. You chose lies, Laura countered, voice trembling. You were like family to me. And now you're the one terrorizing my home. I had to send messages you would take seriously, Cameron replied, his tone sharpening slightly. You weren't listening. And too many people in this town think threats are jokes until bodies fall. Laura stepped forward, pointing at him. You scared my grandchildren. You made my son check over his shoulder every day. And you dragged our family history through the mud with every anonymous message you sent. Cameron exhaled slowly and rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't expect it to go that far. You didn't expect it? Laura repeated, incredulous. Then what did you expect, Cameron? He turned his head away, staring into the shadows near the mine. I expected you to remember. I expected you to know the danger wasn't from me. It was from the people coming after me. And by extension you. Laura's jaw clenched. Explain. Now. Cameron hesitated before speaking. You know how I disappeared years ago? That wasn't the end. I was taken by a group Victor once manipulated, the same group behind the failed experiments at Spoon Island. They didn't want me dead. They wanted control. And when I refused, they made me watch things I can't unsee. When I escaped, I needed to know if they were coming for you next. You should have come to me, Laura said. You know I would have fought with you, helped you. But instead you played games. Cameron's lips curved into the ghost of a smirk. No. You would have tried to drag me back into the light. But I'm not that person anymore, Laura. The world made sure of that. And the only way to keep you safe was to stay in the shadows. Laura stared at him, feeling her heart twist painfully. Then why reveal yourself now? He took another step forward. Because they know I'm alive. And they know I'm connected to you. And if they come for me, they'll use you to hurt me. Laura swallowed hard. So you're telling me the danger isn't you. It's them. I never wanted to be your enemy, Cameron said softly. But I'm not the hero you once thought I could be. She hugged her arms around herself, fighting the swirl of emotions. Tell me everything from the beginning. Every detail. Every threat. Every contact you've had. Cameron nodded once and motioned toward a nearby rock formation. We shouldn't talk out here. It's not safe. Laura refused to move. I'm not going anywhere with you until I know you aren't lying. He met her eyes again. Laura. I'm not the boy who used to follow you around City Hall, asking 100 questions about leadership. I'm not the young man who dreamed of becoming something better. But I've never lied to you. Laura's eyes stung. Except for pretending to be dead. A faint, pained look crossed his face. I had no choice. You always had a choice, she replied quietly. You just didn't choose me. Cameron's jaw tightened. If I had chosen you, you'd be dead. She felt the truth of his words settle heavily around her. She rubbed her temple, overwhelmed. So what happens now? He took a deep breath. Now I warn you. They're coming. They have files on Spencer, Lulu, even Kevin. And they know where Charlotte is. They know everything. Laura froze. Charlotte? Yes, Cameron said grimly. That girl is already on their radar for reasons I don't fully understand. They've been tracking her since Victor used her in his plans. She's a target, Laura. And so are you. Her blood ran cold. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't know how much they had until 2 nights ago, he replied. And when I saw the files, I knew I had to come forward. She turned away, trying to catch her breath. I need time. I need to think. This changes everything. We don't have time, Cameron insisted. Everything accelerates now that they know I've contacted you. Laura closed her eyes. Then we go to Anna. We go to the police. We don't fight this alone. Cameron gave a humorless laugh. You really think the PCPD can stop what's coming? They don't even know the enemy they're up against. You underestimate us, Laura said firmly. You always did. Cameron softened. Maybe. But this isn't a battle you win with speeches and town meetings. Laura stepped closer and her expression shifted. Not fear but determination. You came to me because you still trust me. Because you still believe I can help. So let me help. Cameron looked down. I don't want to drag you deeper into danger. You already have, Laura answered. So let's end this before more lives are destroyed. He met her eyes, long and quiet. All right. But there's something else you need to know. Something I didn't put in the messages. Laura stiffened. What is it? Cameron's voice dropped to almost a whisper. They aren't just tracking your family. They want a member of it. Her heart thudded painfully. Who? He inhaled shakily. Nicholas. Laura's chest tightened. What do they want with Nicholas? Cameron took a step back, resting his hand on the broken fence. A trade. A trade. Laura echoed. For what? For me. Laura's breath caught. What? Why would they want Nicholas in exchange for you? Cameron's eyes flickered. Because Nicholas has something they need. Something he doesn't even know he has. Laura felt the ground tilt beneath her. What are you talking about? Cameron hesitated. A code. A genetic key. Something Victor hid in Nicholas before he died. Something that gives them access to the experiments. Laura staggered. This just keeps getting worse. Cameron nodded. That's why I needed you to know who I am. Why I came out of hiding. You had to understand the stakes. The wind howled through the rocks, filling the long silence that followed. Laura could barely process everything. If what you're saying is true, she murmured, then we need to warn Nicholas immediately. Cameron shook his head. No. If you make any sudden moves, they'll know. They're watching him. Watching you. Watching everyone connected. Laura clenched her fists. So I'm supposed to sit here and do nothing while they hunt my family? You're supposed to move carefully, Cameron replied. There's a difference. Laura felt a surge of anger rise within her. You kept this secret because you didn't trust me enough to handle it. I kept it secret, Cameron said quietly, because once you know this, you can never go back. She glared at him. I don't get that choice anymore. He bowed his head. No, you don't. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night felt colder, the shadows deeper. Laura swallowed hard and forced her voice to steady. We need a plan. We need allies. And we need to find out exactly what Victor did to my son. Cameron looked at her with a mixture of admiration and regret. You're stronger than I remembered. And you're darker than I remembered, she replied softly. But that doesn't mean you're beyond saving. He gave her a faint, almost sad smile. I'm not the one who needs saving. Laura held his gaze. We all do, Cameron. Even you. He stepped back, his figure fading into the darkness. I'll contact you when it's safe. Until then, keep your family close. And trust no one. Laura reached out instinctively. Wait, don't disappear again. I won't, he said, though his voice carried doubt. Not unless I have to. Then he vanished into the shadows, leaving Laura alone with the horrifying truth. The identity of C was not a stranger, but someone she had once loved and believed in. Someone who had walked through fire and darkness and returned as something unrecognizable. And now the danger he carried was coming for her entire family. As she stood under the bleak night sky, Laura felt fear coil in her chest, but it was matched by determination. She lifted her phone, ready to call Anna, ready to mobilize the people of Port Charles, ready to dive into a war she hadn't asked for but could no longer avoid. Because now she knew who C was. And she knew the nightmare had only just begun. The world stopped spinning. It was a cliché Laura had heard in 100 daytime drama scripts. A hyperbolic turn of phrase used to underscore a moment of profound shock. She had even delivered the line herself years ago, in a different role on a different network. But as she stood frozen in the doorway of her own living room at Windmere, the elegant, cold manor that had never truly felt like a home, she understood the visceral, physical truth of it. The polished parquet floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. The distant, rhythmic crash of waves against the cliffs below muted into a dull, throbbing echo in her ears. The neatly typed letters on the single sheet of paper in her trembling hand blurred and swam before her eyes, yet the initial at the bottom, that damning, elegant, cursive C, remained horrifyingly sharp. It had started months ago, a slow-burning poison seeping into the foundations of Port Charles. Secrets were the currency of the city, but this was different. This wasn't a clandestine affair, a hidden birth certificate, or a corporate takeover played out in shadowy boardrooms. This was a systematic, malicious dismantling of lives. It began with small, cruel manipulations. A trusted employee suddenly accused of embezzlement, a private medical record leaked at the worst possible moment, a long-buried shame whispered at a society gala. Then the stakes escalated. A critical drug trial at General Hospital was sabotaged, putting patients' lives at risk. A fire broke out at Charlie's pub, nearly claiming the lives of beloved friends. Evidence surfaced that seemed to implicate various citizens in crimes they didn't commit, tearing apart relationships and alliances that had taken decades to build. And through it all, the signature, a single type C at the end of every taunting note, every piece of fabricated evidence, every digital communique. C was a specter, a looming malevolence that had the entire town looking over its shoulder, suspicion fraying the bonds of family and friendship. The police, led by a frustrated Dante Falconeri, hit dead end after dead end. The C was a ghost, omnipresent and utterly untouchable. Laura, as the mayor of Port Charles and the heart of so many community webs, had taken the attacks personally. She had made it her mission to unmask C. Not just for justice, but for the soul of the city she loved. She'd spent countless late nights in her office at City Hall, cross-referencing timelines, mapping connections, searching for a motive that tied the disparate acts of sabotage together. She had pored over old files, looking for a grievance deep enough to fuel such consuming hatred. She had considered everyone. Old enemies thought vanquished, new faces with unclear pasts, even in her darkest, most private moments, individuals closer to home whose pain she knew could have festered into something monstrous. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A slip in the digital veil. C was careful, using layers of encryption and anonymizing networks, but a pattern emerged in the metadata of a leaked document. A subtle, recurring digital fingerprint tied to a specific, private server. Tracing it was a risk, requiring skills that skirted the edges of legality. Spencer, her grandson, desperate to protect the family and to prove himself, had enlisted the help of a reluctant but brilliant hacker he knew. They followed the trail through a labyrinth of false leads and digital booby traps until it pointed to a physical location. A nondescript office suite in a corporate plaza on the outskirts of town, registered to a shell corporation. Laura, against Dante's advice to leave it to the police, had gone herself. She couldn't wait. The need to know, to look into the eyes of the person who had caused so much suffering, was a physical compulsion. The office was empty, cleaned out with clinical efficiency. But in the haste of what was clearly a recent departure, one piece of paper had been missed, caught under the leg of a heavy desk that had been left behind. It was a handwritten draft of one of the later C messages, a working copy. The language was colder, more personal than the typed final versions. And at the bottom, not typed but signed with a flourish of dark ink, was that initial, C. She knew that handwriting. She had known it for over 40 years. It was a hand that had penned letters of both love and despair, that had signed legal documents and birthday cards, a hand she had held in moments of joy and unspeakable grief. The strokes were uniquely, unmistakably his. The world didn't just stop. It shattered, and every shard reflected a piece of her history, now grotesquely distorted. The drive back to Windermere was a blur. She remembered nothing of the roads, the traffic lights, the turn onto the private drive. Her body operated on a kind of autopilot, while her mind was a cacophony of denial. It's a forgery. A frame. Someone is mimicking his hand. It's too obvious. It's a trick. But the deeper, more knowing part of her, the part that had lived a lifetime in this town of secrets, recognized the terrible truth. The malice in the wording of the draft note, the specific, intimate knowledge of people's weaknesses that had been exploited. It wasn't the work of a stranger. It was the work of someone who had been inside their lives, their homes, their hearts. She walked through the grand, echoing halls of Windermere, the paper a burning brand in her hand. She ended up in the living room, drawn to the wall of framed photographs, a curated history of a complicated, often tragic family. There they were, frozen moments of a shared past. Her younger self, radiant and hopeful, beside a man whose smile then held a charm that could light up a room, even if shadows always lingered at its edges. Pictures of their children. Lucky as a boy, Nicholas at various ages, each photograph a testament to survival amidst chaos. And more recent photos. Spencer, Victoria, the growing next generation. Her eyes fixed on one portrait in particular. It was him. Not as the young, tormented romantic she first loved, nor as the middle-aged man grappling with his demons, but as he was now, older, his hair silvered, his face lined with the years, but his eyes still holding that captivating, penetrating intensity. The charm had hardened into a patina of sophistication. The shadows had deepened into something more permanent. He had been back in Port Charles for a while now, ostensibly reformed, a contrite figure seeking to rebuild bridges with his family, to be a grandfather, to find a measure of peace. He had been helpful, offering counsel, using his vast resources to assist the city in subtle ways. He had been at her side at charity events, a supportive presence. He had spoken of atonement, and she, in her enduring foolish capacity to see the best in people, especially in him, had wanted to believe it. She had allowed herself to think that the long, tortuous road of their lives might finally be leading to a quiet, dignified sunset. Now, staring at the evidence in her own handwriting, his handwriting, she saw that sunset for the illusion it was. It was not an ending, but the prelude to a deeper, more personal night. The attacks hadn't been random. She reviewed them in her mind with this new horrifying lens. The sabotage drug trial? The head of research was a doctor who had once testified against him in a long-ago court case. The employee accused of embezzlement? The son of a former business rival. The fire at Charlie's? A place where his son, Nicholas, had found solace and community away from the Spencer legacy. And the leaked secrets, the shattered trust, each one targeted a person or an institution that was connected to him, that had, in his twisted perception, wronged him or taken something from him. Port Charles itself was a monument to his failures and his losses, To her, to his children, to the legacy he felt was his birthright. He wasn't just lashing out. He was meticulously dismantling the entire ecosystem of the town, punishing it for existing without his control. But why the charade? Why come back, play the repentant patriarch, only to wage a secret war from the shadows? The answer, as it always had been with him, was about power and narrative. To watch them scramble, to see the fear and suspicion grow, all while he stood amongst them, offering a comforting hand, was the ultimate manipulation. It was a god complex refined over a lifetime. He was writing the script, directing the play, and watching his actors, his family, his enemies, the entire town, perform in a tragedy of his own design. And his reunion with her, his support of her mayoral work, that was the cruelest layer. It placed him at the very center of the investigation, allowed him to monitor her progress, to subtly steer her away from the truth, all while pretending to be her ally. He had been looking into her eyes, listening to her fears about C, offering solace, all the while being the source of the terror. A wave of nausea, hot and acrid, rose in her throat. She gripped the back of a wingback chair, her knuckles white. The betrayal was so complete, so psychologically violent, that it felt like a physical violation. This was beyond their old battles, beyond the arguments, the infidelities, the power struggles. This was a fundamental annihilation of the last vestiges of trust, of the shared history that, despite everything, she had clung to as something real. He hadn't just attacked Port Charles. He had attacked her very soul, using her love for the town and its people as the weapon. The sound of the front door opening and closing echoed through the foyer. Familiar footsteps, measured and confident, sounded on the marble floor. They were coming toward the living room. Her heart, which had felt like a block of ice in her chest, began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She quickly folded the paper, shoving it into the pocket of her blazer, her movements jerky with panic. She couldn't face him. Not yet. She needed time to think, to plan, to lock down the scream that was building in her lungs. Laura. His voice, smooth and cultured, filled the doorway. I thought I saw your car. You're home early. Is everything all right? She turned, forcing her muscles to obey, arranging her face into what she hoped was a neutral mask. He stood there as he always did, impeccably dressed, a slight, concerned smile on his face. He looked the picture of the devoted partner, the concerned citizen. Now she saw the performance for what it was. She saw the calculation in his eyes, the slight tilt of his head as he assessed her. Was she paler than usual? Was her posture too rigid? He was reading her just as he read everyone. Just a long day at City Hall, she said, her voice sounding thin and distant to her own ears. The C investigation, it's taking its toll. He stepped into the room, his expression shifting to one of sympathetic concern. He moved to the sideboard and poured 2 glasses of water, handing one to her. His fingers brushed against hers. She recoiled internally, a jolt of revulsion shooting through her, but she forced herself to hold steady. It's a terrible burden, he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble. You carry so much for this town. I've told you you need to delegate. Let the police handle it. Dante is a capable man. He took a sip of water, watching her over the rim of the glass. You look exhausted. Perhaps you're too close to it. Sometimes the answer is right in front of us, but we can't see it because we're looking for something complicated. The double meaning in his words hung in the air like poison gas. Right in front of us. Was he toying with her now? Was this part of the game, to see how long it would take for her to suspect the man in her own home? I'm beginning to think you might be right, she managed to say, turning slightly away under the pretense of looking out at the stormy sea. The motives, they seem so personal. It's as if she knows everyone's deepest wounds. Of course, he said, coming to stand beside her, following her gaze out the window. The gathering clouds mirrored the tempest inside her. That's the mark of a truly formidable adversary. Intimate knowledge. It's not about money or crude power. It's about psychology. About making people feel vulnerable in their own skins, in their own relationships. It's a much more refined form of revenge. Revenge. He said the word so calmly, as if discussing a theory in a textbook. Laura felt the paper in her pocket like a live coal burning against her hip. She wanted to whirl around, to slap the glass from his hand, to scream, I know! and tear the mask from his face. But she couldn't. The revelation was too new, too raw. He was dangerous. If he realized she knew, the game would change instantly. The shadow war would become an open conflict, and she had no idea what he was capable of when cornered. The fires, the sabotages, the ruined lives, they were proof he had no limits. She also thought of their children, of Spencer, of Nicholas's memory, of the grandchildren. His war until now had been diffuse. If she confronted him, she would make herself and everyone she loved the direct, sole target of his fury. She needed to be smarter than she had ever been. She needed to gather proof, real irrefutable proof that could stand up in court and in the court of public opinion. She needed to protect the town from the collapse that would follow when the truth emerged. Refined, she repeated, the word tasting like ash. Or pathological. He turned his head, his gaze sharpening. You sound as if you've had a breakthrough. Maybe, she said, meeting his eyes for the first time since he entered the room. It was a Herculean effort. She looked into the blue eyes she had once loved, that had once held what she believed was genuine tenderness. And now she saw only the cold, glittering abyss of a master manipulator. I'm beginning to see a pattern. A very, very old pattern. It's not about what people have done recently. It's about a ledger of grievances going back decades. C isn't just attacking Port Charles. C is settling scores. A flicker, so fast she would have missed it if she weren't hyper-aware, passed through his eyes. It wasn't alarm but something akin to appreciation. Pride even. He was admiring the deductive work of his opponent. Her. It sounds like you're getting warm, he said softly, a hint of a challenge in his tone. But be careful, Laura. Uncovering a truth this ugly, it can have consequences. For everyone. Sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie. Is that a warning? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A concern, he corrected, placing his glass down with a soft click. From someone who cares about you. Deeply. The hypocrisy of the statement was so vast it threatened to drown her. She gave a small, tight nod, unable to trust her voice further. I think I'll go lie down for a bit, she said, moving toward the doorway, needing to escape the suffocating pressure of his presence. Of course, he said, his tone back to gentle concern. Rest. We can talk more over dinner. She walked out, feeling his eyes on her back every step of the way. She climbed the grand staircase, her legs weak, and didn't stop until she was inside her private sitting room, the door locked firmly behind her. Only then did she allow herself to collapse into a chair, her body trembling uncontrollably. The horror of it was not just in the discovery, but in the implications that spiderwebbed out from it, touching every corner of her life and the life of Port Charles. The man known as C was not a stranger, a newcomer or a forgotten foe. He was the ghost that had haunted her life since she was a teenage girl. He was the architect of so much of her joy and her pain. He was the father of her children. He was her first love, her greatest mistake, her most enduring tragedy. The single damning initial stood for the name she now had to force herself to think, to accept as the source of all this evil. Cassadine. Not just any Cassadine. It was C. It was Constantine. It was Caesar. But the handwriting, the intimate knowledge, the deeply personal decades-old vendetta, it all narrowed, with a terrible inevitable clarity, to one man. To the man who had just offered her a glass of water and a word of caution. Laura Spencer, the mayor of Port Charles, the woman who had survived kidnappings, madness, loss, and heartbreak, sat alone in the gathering gloom of her room, the truth settling into her bones like a fatal chill. The enemy was not at the gates. The enemy was inside the castle. He was sitting by the fire downstairs, waiting for her to join him for dinner. The war for Port Charles was not a battle against an outside force. It was a civil war, and it had just come home. And as the full weight of it pressed down upon her, a new, even more terrifying thought emerged. This wasn't just about revenge for the past. If he was C, then his return, his performance of redemption, his insinuation into her life and the town's power structure, it had a final overarching goal. This was his master plan, the culmination of a lifetime of scheming. He wasn't just trying to destroy Port Charles. He was trying to take it over. From the inside. And he had been using her, the town's beloved symbol of resilience, as his key to the kingdom. The horror of the betrayal was now eclipsed by the dread of his ambition. She had uncovered the who. But the what and the why were only just beginning to reveal their monstrous shape. The game was far from over. In fact, with her discovery, the most dangerous phase had just begun.